Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is Steve with My Audio Stuff, and do I have another surprise for you today? And yes, we can look at the insides of this. I know that everybody likes that when I pull amplifiers apart. From about 1996, 95, somewhere in there, this is the Harman Kardon HK6500 Integrated Amplifier. And I picked this up on eBay, a while ago for maybe $100, something like that. It really wasn't much. This is rated about 60, 70 watts per channel. And this represents more or less Harman Kardon's last foray, or what I consider to be their last foray into truly excellent audio. I know they have the audio-visual receivers and all of that, but sonically, they're not really the equal of these. This particular amplifier is probably closer to the HK655 in features and power, and I have one of those too. I did a little ditty for My Audio Stuff on that one, and that dates from about 1985, 86. That's when the 655 came out, and this one about a decade later. So that's what you're looking at here. And just really quick before we start to get into the inside of it, you can see this very simplistic layout, and that really is what Harman Kardon did with the majority of their receivers, no matter what they were. They tried to keep things really simple. You know, two sets of speakers, bass and treble, and sonically they were tastefully laid out. The bass boosted the highs, the bass boosted the lows, probably below 250 hertz. It kept it out of that boomy range. Treble probably around, 10, 12,000 hertz. Balance control, you can see all the tape duplication controls on this thing, what it has. Copy 1 to 2, tape 1, source, tape 2. So you can hook up two tape decks, copy from one to the other. They're really simple function selector, video CD, tuner, phono, all of that. Volume control, and then one of the last years that they did this, where they gave you the choice of being able to either hook up a moving coil cartridge or moving magnet cartridge. And then, of course, some of my favorite features, and I believe that this was about the very end for an excellent feature that Harman Kardon had, but they discontinued it. I think not enough people really appreciated this, and that was phase correct loudness. And this is one of the last integrated amps to feature that. And that's basically loudness control, or a loudness control with active circuitry built into it. That is transistorized circuitry built into it. The majority of loudness controls are just, simple filter circuits with wires that go over to your volume control, where they get some of their boost and all of that. The drawback of loudness is that it does tend to introduce its own distortions and things like that, phase distortion, and basically, practically speaking, it just means that when you turn the loudness circuit on, it generally makes your lows muddier. Well, Harman Kardon saw that, and so they built phase correction circuitry into the loudness control, which gives you cleaner loudness functions, cleaner lows and whatnot, tighter lows when you engage the loudness. But I guess not enough people really appreciated this, but this is probably one of the few truly brilliant circuitry designs, in my opinion, that Harman Kardon had. And again, this integrated amplifier features that. And probably another year after this amplifier came out, they wouldn't have any of that anymore. So then it just became regular muddy loudness. But again, Harman Kardon had this feature on their upper end integrated amplifiers for about a decade, dating from probably 1985, 86, all the way up till the mid-90s. And then, of course, you go over, the subsonic filter and all of that. And then the mode switch for stereo, mono. And then this is another interesting thing. This wirelessly, or how do I say this, without relays, disconnects the amplifier from the preamplifier. And so you can hook up an equalizer or something like that, as it says, an external processor in between the two. And I don't know how much longer Harman Kardon had this, but it's basically a preamp out, amplifier in disconnect switch, but it does it more so through, I think, SCRs and things like that, gates, electronic gates that open and close. So anyway, This is the HK6500. Another feature of this thing really quickly is that it has ultra low negative feedback, and I've explained some of that before. Most transistorized amplifiers, you know, I'm guessing here, but probably the feedback on most of them is probably in the upper 20s, and that's simply taking some of the output signal or taking some of the signal from the latter stages of the amplifier, how's that, and feeding it into the earlier stages of the amp. And that's basically, it acts more or less as a governor to keep the amplifier from running away and keeps it more stable. I'm sure some of you engineer types understand that far better than I do. But the bottom line about negative feedback is that it tends to introduce phase distortion, and it tends to make the amplifier sound a little less tight, a little less precise. And so amplifiers generally that have lower negative feedback, that don't introduce as much of the output signal back into the input or various stages that are close to the input, generally sound better for the reasons that I've given you. And this amplifier features 12 decibels of negative feedback, which is pretty low. It simply means that the amplifier is stable enough on its own that they don't have to introduce huge amounts of negative feedback. And if you get into a lot of the tube amplifiers, I have some of those as well, those are generally about 6 or 5 dB. So they're even lower than transistorized amplifiers, just because of the nature of tubes and the fact that you don't have nearly as many boost stages in tubes. They generally run more stable, so they don't require as much negative feedback. But this is one of the last integrated amplifiers to use ultra low levels, and this was generally found only on the upper end of the integrated amplifiers of the Harman Kardon line. The lower levels would have, you know, 24 dB or 22 dB of negative feedback, but the upper levels, they built the amplifiers even better, so they required less negative feedback. So I thought I would just tell you that. So again, phase correct loudness, not appreciated, but a brilliant innovation of Harman Kardon, and ultra low negative feedback. So I've gone ahead and I've opened it up for you. And again, this amplifier dates from about 1996 or I don't know, 95, somewhere in there. But what is so interesting about this is not only that it features a pretty big power transformer, and by the way, this is about 60 watts per channel, 70 watts per channel, but if you look really closely, there aren't any integrated circuits in this thing. This amplifier features discrete transistorized circuitry, and that's not only in the loudness control, and you can see the phase correct loudness right here. So I mean, this is active transistorized circuitry here, but also, just as importantly, in the integrated amp preamplifier section. These are all individual transistors. And then the amplifier section, it's the same way. Discrete circuitry, and then the phono section, not to be underrated or underestimated again, that's the phono section of this thing. Most phono sections would be maybe a quarter of the size, because most people regardless would use probably a little op-amp chip and a few resistors and capacitors. These people again opted even in the phono circuit for complete discrete circuitry. Phono circuit in this thing is rated at 20 to 20 at a half decibel. And I'm sure there are op-amp phono sections that would do the same thing. It's just that this does it probably with lower noise, and it does it in a more dynamic fashion because you have a lot more room, obviously, for the electrons to move around, and that's what discrete circuitry in a general sense gives you. So it'll give you more dynamic sound and all of that. But again, really an excellent phono section, and you can see the amplifier section here, the power transistors. It's classic push-pull NPN PNP circuitry in this thing. Nothing negative to say about this. Very simple receiver. If you want more features, you know, obviously you could add an equalizer to it. You can see the back features unswitched and switched plugs on it. So if you want to plug in a Bluetooth, you'd plug that in to the switch, so it would turn it on when you turn the integrated amp on. And then something that was very standard on Harman Kardons all the way back into the mid-'80s, maybe even before that, but the speaker operating mode, that's basically just a matching transformer. So if you want to run four 4-ohm speakers, just turn it to 4 ohms. And then 4 8-ohm speakers, then you'd put that to 8 ohms. And that way it would keep the amp from getting too hot. But, you know, another good feature, banana plugs for the speakers. I don't really need to talk about any of that. And then, of course, over here, tape 1 and tape 2. And then right here up above, you can see the preamplifier out, amplifier in jacks. That's what those are. And they're switched internally via solid state switching. And then the phono section, moving magnet, moving coil, and then all the other hookups and whatnot. Again, this really is another excellent integrated amplifiers. And you used to be able to get them on eBay pretty cheap because people didn't really recognize how excellent these were. Very dependable, bulletproof, I think, in a lot of ways, like the 655 and 665 of the 1980s and early 90s were. And really one of the last integrated amplifiers, mostly in the line of the 655, to feature both phase correct loudness and ultra low negative feedback. This is an excellent piece of audio. Well, that's about all I have to say today. If you would like, I have another YouTube site, Rumble site. It's called A Father's Devotions, and there should be a link for it on this site as well. This is Steve with my audio stuff, and God bless you all.